Are you getting tired of StarCraft 2 balance updates yet? Today, it is time for what they call a hotfix patch, but honestly, I think they may as well call it 5.0.17 because we yet again have some very significant changes to the multiplayer version of the game. Apparently, Toby wants to come and say hello. I've been editing in this chair for a while and I suddenly start yapping, so obviously that means that I'm not talking to you guys, I'm talking to him. At least that's what he believes. Okay. I've got some thoughts yet again. This is honestly pretty wild. So we've made some changes and adjustments based on feedback and player data over the last week, and we will continue to monitor the patch and make further changes if necessary. This right over here surprises me a little bit. Blizzard hasn't really been too communicative over like the last 5 years when it comes to StarCraft 2, so that's the main concern I think that most people have, right? Whenever they announce a big set of changes, how closely are they gonna be paying attention if, for example, Zerg turns out to be a little bit busted? Well, it turns out they are paying attention, and apparently they're making further changes if necessary. So, first off, this is actually a pretty significant change. So the default geyser for gas has been reduced from 2500 Vespene to 2000 Vespene. It always used to be 2250, then with 5.0.16 they increased it to 2500, and now they're reducing it to 2000. So that means that overall we get more minerals but less gas than what we had, well, for about a year or so, no, actually far longer than that, for what we had for a very long time in StarCraft 2. It's interesting, right? So I would imagine the main reasoning for this, so you get 1000 gas less per base, that's actually quite a lot, is that it's gonna force people to move further and beyond like 3 to 4 bases. Most StarCraft maps have a relatively easy to take 4 bases, but for a lot of strategies, especially in the long run, if you're gonna be allowed to sit back and maybe turtle up, you're gonna need a 5th base now. You're gonna potentially even need a 6th. I mean, if you are indeed gonna be running 4 bases, right, you're gonna have 1000 gas less per base. That's a lot. You're gonna have to make some adjustments there. So sitting back, and I especially in my mind, and maybe this is not entirely fair, but I see this especially for Protoss. Whenever they happen to be in a weird late game scenario and they just have a bunch of gas, they just make a few Archons. You can never really go wrong with Archons in those scenarios. Those scenarios are going to be far less frequent moving forward. So I like this change. I think it's a good one. Larva rate increased from 9.5 to 9.9. Now this sounds like a buff, but it's actually a nerf. But it's still a buff compared to the old version. So I looked it up. The old larva spawn rate in basically all of Legacy of the Void up until like a week ago used to be 10.7 seconds, meaning that a larva gets generated every 10.7 seconds passively on a hatch. When they first introduced PTR2 for patch 5.0.16, they lowered that value to 9 seconds. Then with the live version of the game, 5.0.16 release, they increased it to 9.5, which is still a little bit busted, and now they're increasing it to 9.9. Are you still keeping track? So, this is a buff compared to the previous version of the game, but a nerf compared to the version of the game we've been playing for about a week. And I think this is very fair, especially in Zerg vs. Terran, but also in Zerg, honestly, no, in both ZVP and ZVT. ZVP I'm a little bit more forgiving on, I suppose, because the early game for Protoss is so hard to figure out, but honestly, ZVP also seemed to be a little bit busted. Yeah, this is going to make Zerg weaker than it has been over the last week, but still stronger than it used to be for like the last couple of years. Are you still keeping track? Okay. This right over here is a curious one to me. Widowmine lock-on time reduced from 1.07 seconds to 0.85 seconds. Okay. What exactly does this mean? From what I understand, if you have specifically a fight in Zerg vs. Terran, where Zerglings run over a Widowmine that's burrowed on creep, in the previous version of the game, you could just run through it with the Zerglings, and the Zerglings would not take any damage from the Widowmine. Right now, if you have a group of Zerglings and you run through a Widowmine that's burrowed on creep, the Zerglings will actually explode. Pretty significant change there. Now, I always kind of felt that the Widowmine in ZVT is fine, but it's probably problematic in Protoss versus Terran. Remember in 5.0.15 how like a lot of Protoss players would just make like, they would force Terran to sit on like 3-4 bases and they would take the whole map. Cloaked Widowmines especially make that way harder for Protoss players to do. I wonder if they should bring that back instead, but this is a pretty significant buff that obviously will help out in Zerg versus Terran, but also definitely in Protoss versus Terran. I'm not really sure if this is necessary. Maybe we should go back to the Cloaked Widowmine instead, when you get an armory. because it makes Protoss, a lot more careful out on the map. And that's one of the things that this patch in general hasn't really addressed very much. I mean, maybe the changes to the Protoss early game are also going to automatically adjust how that sort of mid-game and late-game meta in PvT is going to be played. We haven't really gotten to that point yet, because Protoss players are kind of fumbling the early game still, but this seems like a pretty random change in my mind, and maybe just a straight-up nerf to Zerg in Terran versus Zerg, but because of the Larva spawn rate change, maybe it's fine. Really difficult to say, and I'm really not entirely sure who's asking for this. And this one over here, Reaper build time increased from 32 to 34 seconds. Who's asking for this, right? So, from what I understand, and this is the main thing, if I can be critical of Blizzard, like, I'm very glad they're buffing and nerfing and they're changing the game up. I think that's really fun. But if I can be critical, can we please include for every change, like, one little sentence to describe what the intended goal is? Because from my understanding, and I honestly don't know, but from what I understand, in 5.0.16, the goal has been to increase early game variety, right? That's the word that we keep seeing thrown around. Reaper build time increases is effectively going to, I think, remove, well, maybe not quite remove, but significantly reduce the strength of like a double barracks opener for Terran versus Zerg. Right? If you want to go for a proxy Reaper build, it's going to be significantly worse now. 2 seconds doesn't sound like a long time, but if you're going to make 10 Reapers, it adds up real quick. And that's already a build we didn't really see too much. Now, maybe because of the early game shenanigans, with obviously the 8 worker start, there's some Zerg players out there that are really struggling against the very first Reaper that gets across. That's really the only thing that I can think of where this would make sense. But in all the pro-level games that I've seen, top-level Zergs are dealing with the very first Reaper just fine. Like, they're not really taking more damage than they used to in the past. And if push really comes to shove, you could potentially even make like your hatchery one supply earlier than what you have been doing. So I find this kind of an odd change, and it seems to be counterintuitive, right? Like, if we're trying to increase early game variety, then what's the point of this? And it's the same over here with the Adept. So the Adept pre-Warp Gate build time has been increased from 30 to 33 seconds. I haven't seen that many Adept openers, specifically in Zerg versus Protoss. They have become more common again over the last few days, but nerfing it seems a little bit silly. Like, maybe, I've been thinking about this one all morning, maybe this is gonna allow Zergs to go from like a, maybe like a 10 pool, or maybe like a 12 pool, or like an 8 pool or something, which would make that a little bit more powerful. So in that way, you could increase early game variety in that regard. But some of these changes seem kind of random to me, and I would really like to have a little explainer as to what the goal for that intended change is. I'm okay with it, I guess, but I don't think we really need this. Honestly, I think these 2 changes alone probably would have been enough. But anyways, we have some more. Biles no longer instantly destroy force fields. So that's corrosive bile from a Ravager. Instead, it destroys 50% of its duration. Okay, let's think about that for a little bit, right? So, Protoss puts down a force field. It lasts for like, what, 10 seconds or so. Zerg sees it with a Ravager, gets the Ravager within range, throws a corrosive bile up in the air, which takes a few seconds, and then it ultimately kills the force field. Force fields, I think, on average, with corrosive biles out on the battlefield, probably last like 4 seconds or so. Right now, it's going to last like a few seconds longer, so I guess every force field is going to last like, say, 3 seconds longer in a high-level game than they have up until this point. I kind of feel like this is one of those changes where a lot of Zerg players are going to be caught off guard by it, more so than this actually being a very significant change in the long run. You know, I feel like this is one of those changes where in a pinch, a lot of Zerg players are going to forget. It's like, oh crap, right. The force fields don't get destroyed anymore all the way through. It's a sentry buff. That much is clear. Certainly a sentry buff. And considering that over the last week, the only viable playstyle I've really seen for Protoss versus Zerg especially is Protoss players are rushing up to Sky Toss, Ground Toss in general with the Warp Gate changes and with the Larva spawn rate, it's been kind of insane. So I think across the board, this is definitely a nice change for Protoss. But again, I feel like nerfing this and then maybe changing this already makes this potentially unnecessary, although it's kind of a cool idea. It's the same for the Adept change, like I mentioned. It's a bit funky. So the High Templar and Dark Templar pre-Warp Gate build time has been decreased from 40 to 40 seconds. So in all of patch 5.0.16, the build time of Warp Gate units has been changed over and over and over again. I have tried to watch as many 5.0.16 games as possible, and I have really not seen more than like 1 or 2 games where a High Templar and a Dark Templar got produced out of a regular gateway. So, again, I'm fine with it, but what's the point? Like, is there really some sort of specific strategy where the 3 seconds on, or do we just like round numbers? Because if we just like round numbers, I'm on board with that, but then why did we change it in PTR2 in the first place? I don't really know. Anyways, whatever. Mothership shields reduced from 350 to 200, and then the Mothership's health increased from 350 to 400. So this is an overall nerf to the Mothership. So rather than having 700 HP, they're going to have 600 HP. And furthermore, because the shields are less beefy, if Zergs do manage to break through the shield and then dish some base damage to the Mothership, but then not actually kill the Mothership, in the next fight, the Mothership is going to be weaker, which is going to be hitting, obviously, more frequently because there's less shields overall, because the shields regenerate, but the base health, of course, for Protoss units doesn't. Okay. I still kind of wonder if maybe the Mothership should just be abductable. Not a very popular opinion, but probably fine. Then again, though, this has been the only viable build for Protoss over the last week, and it's kind of difficult to say what it's actually going to look like, because I've seen a lot of Protoss players try to rush up towards the Mothership and just try to get that Skytles army out as quickly as possible, while crossing their fingers and trying to not die in the mid-game. So I find some of these changes a little bit questionable. I don't necessarily hate it. I think it's all fine. I think all of these changes are good. But some of them I'm just wondering about, like, hey, what is even really the point? There are also a bunch of bug fixes. So fix an issue where the ancestor weapon used to have an incorrect base and +3 weapon attack. There's like a couple of tooltip changes for different languages and all that. Units produced out of gateways have been given a visual spawn indicator. Queens will now spawn facing their origin hatchery. Yeah, a couple of small things. Reverted the queen inject shuffle adjustment. Fixed an issue where the load nearby did not have a default hotkey set. As far as I can tell, none of these are too significant. Although there may be very well one of these that actually is going to have a pretty significant impact on the balance of the game, but only time will really tell. Look, should we be calling this still 5.0.16? Honestly, this feels like it's, again, a step in the other direction, right? Like, yes, it's going to increase more variety, but first we want to increase turtling a little bit by giving more minerals on a base, and now we're kind of heading in the opposite direction when you get up to, like, 4 bases. First, we want to increase the larva rate, and it's still quicker, but it's been nullified quite a bit. Pretty arbitrary Widowmine change. I'm not sure who's asking for this. Pretty arbitrary Reaper change. Pretty arbitrary Adept build time increase. Pretty arbitrary High Templar and Dark Templar build time decrease. I think all of it is fine. By far, the most significant things, in my opinion, are the force field change, which may very well make ground toss timing attacks more viable against Zerg in particular. Like, maybe we're going to go back to the Heart of the Swarm meta, for those of you that have been watching SC2 for a long time. For a while there, Protoss players used to make like a dozen sentries and just force field all over the base. Yeah, Zergs couldn't really deal with it. Maybe that's going to be something that we bring back again for a little bit. Honestly, this change alone probably would have been enough together with this change. I think these two are by far the biggest ones. So nerfing the spawn rate for Zerg a little bit. And then, yeah, increasing the amount of time people have to spend out onto the map seems fine to me. These other changes, I guess, are fine. Now, real quick, you may have noticed I've got a bit of a cold, actually, which is not ideal. I'm casting a StarCraft 2 tournament in Germany this weekend. And I've been preparing videos in advance. So I've got 4 videos that I prepped in advance for the next couple of days. They are obviously not going to be on this, like, absolute latest patch. It's also the case that a lot of StarCraft players will be traveling over the next couple days to get to Germany in time. So I don't really expect to see any real changes or any real, like, practice, I suppose, until Home Story Cup, which is the tournament, is going to be played. So Home Story Cup is going to be pretty spicy. I'll definitely cast a bunch of those games from that tournament on my channel on YouTube as well next week. So if you're interested in that, make sure you subscribe. But yeah, I don't think there will really be a lot of games shared over the next couple days until the tournament starts, which is always quite interesting. The Home Story Cup is pretty laid back. Doesn't necessarily have like the absolute biggest prize pool out there, so I don't think it's a huge deal to have a change to the game right before an event like it. But yeah, this will very much so, I guess, be a test we'll have live in the studio. Like, we'll have to see what this actually looks like when the pro gamers get to play on it. Because I think today is Wednesday as I am recording this. Thursday is probably when most of the players will be traveling. Potentially some as well, though, that are traveling far. They may very well be flying in today, and this was just dropped a few hours ago, so they're probably not really gonna get any practice on this at all until they actually arrive in Germany, and then maybe they play a handful of games. But yeah, the proof, I guess, will be in the pudding, right? We'll have to see what this exactly will look like, but in the 4 videos that I did record in advance, I do talk about all of the changes, and I do reference the brand new patch, which at the time that that video goes up is not going to be the brand new patch, because this is the brand new patch. This is the brand new patch. You get what I'm trying to say? Anyways, let me know what your thoughts are down below in the description of this video, or the description of this video? Let me try that again. Let me know what your thoughts are down below in the comment section of this video. Do you think this is a step in the right direction? I don't really think there's a whole lot to complain about, but why? 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 I don't get it.